This implementation has a couple of problems. The first problem is this hard-coded action name, which we have repeated in two places. Here's one instance in our API middleware, and here's another instance when dispatching an action. We don't want to hard-code this action name and repeat it in multiple places. So we should create an action creator to solve this problem. The second problem is the inconsistent naming convention here. So we have API call began and API request failed. It would be better to call the second action API call failed. Okay. So here in the store folder, let's add a new file called api.js. In this file, we want to import the create action function of Redux toolkit, and then create 3 actions. So export constant, API call began. We set this to create action of API call began. We're going to create another action called API call success. And the last one is going to be API call failed. So now we have a consistent naming convention. Beautiful. Let's save the changes. Now we go to our middleware and replace this hard-coded string with the type of our action. So on the top, we're going to import all actions from, currently we are in the middleware folder. So we have to go one level up. Now we are in the store folder, and here we can import the API module. Now we're going to replace this with actions.API call began. Now, as you know, this is a function, so we're going to get its type property, which is going to return this string over here. Actually, we could also namespace this action. So we could change this to API/call began, /call success, and /call failed. This is more consistent with other actions in our application. Okay, so save the changes. Now we go to index.js. We no longer have to dispatch an action like this. We can use our action creator to create this action object. So on the top, we're going to import all actions from store/API. Now we're going to call store.dispatch. Here we call actions.API call began. And as the payload, we're going to pass this object over here, the object that contains these 3 properties. So copy, paste it over here. Beautiful. Now compare these 2 solutions. Using an action creator is much easier and safer. So let's remove these few lines. Good. Also, we want to replace API request failed with actions.API call failed, the type. That is better. Now, in this case, we can actually get rid of this property because we don't want to have to specify the unerror property every time we are making an API call. Our middleware should be intelligent enough to take care of this. So we should reserve this for specific scenarios. Let's say if we couldn't get the bugs from the server, there is something specific we want to do in relation to the bugs. But anything general, we can implement it in our middleware. So let's delete this line. That's better. Now we go in our middleware. So if we catch an error, we want to dispatch a general error action. So dispatch, here we're going to call actions.API call failed. And in the payload, we can pass the error object. So this is our general error action. Now for specific scenarios, we can also dispatch an action with this type. Now, with this implementation, it is possible that we don't specify the unerror property. So before we dispatch this action, we got to make sure that unerror is defined. Okay? Now we can take the same approach when dispatching the success action. So first, we're going to have a general success dispatch. So here we're going to dispatch actions.API call success. And for the payload, we're going to pass response.data. That is our general success action. Then we're going to have this specific action. Once again, we want to make sure that unsuccess is defined. Now, save the changes. Let's test our implementation. So here we have 2 actions with consistent naming, API call began and API call failed. If you look at the failed action in the payload, you can see the error object. Now, if this is too much information, you can only pass the message. Now, back in our API middleware, let's change the port back to 9001 and test the success scenario. So here we have 3 actions. API call began, API call success, and then bugs received. Beautiful. If you look at this action, you can see that payload contains all the bugs that we received from the server. So these 2 actions indicate that we successfully called our API. Now, with this action, we should populate our store with the list of bugs. We're going to do that later in this section.